So you are all welcome to our class for today. Today, I promised you that we are going to discuss some few things on grammar, the use of English language. Definitely, we also have your scheme of work or your use of English syllabus that we will also be going through. But I believe if you can know the basics of English language, you should be able to answer any question that comes from English language. So what we are going to discuss today is basically the basic elements of grammar. And that is exactly what will be the basis of you getting to know more of all questions that will be asked of you when you start taking the use of English. Now, when you know the various components of a sentence in any English question that is given to you, then if it is antonyms or synonyms or homophones or whatever parts of speech or missing the gap, you're asked to find the verb or the word that will complete that sentence. If you know the various parts of each of these sentences, you can be able to know if the missing word can either be a verb or it can either be the subject, the complement, or the adjoint. Then if you get to know this, then you can easily be able to answer questions when such question comes. So that's exactly what we are going to discuss today. So we are going to look at that, and I want you to pay more than the usual attention as we'll see ourselves solving questions or answering questions on this. Though today we're not going to look at more on questions that has to do with this, but as time goes on, I'm going to dig out questions related to all these from your past question, the use of English past question. And if you are abreast to most of what I posted on my YouTube channel, the novel is one important part you should get in line with. The Life Changer novel written by Khadija. I want you to go and learn that, to read that novel very well, and then look at some important questions I've dropped in form of videos on my channel that can truly help you solve questions on that. So when we talk about the basic elements of grammar, what do we really mean by the basic elements of grammar? Now, part of speech, when we talk about grammar, we talk about the parts of speech. And when we talk about the part of speech, we talk about noun, we hear of noun, we hear of verb, we talk about pronouns, we talk about the adverbs, and lots more. So when we talk about noun, this is normal, verbs, pronouns, adverbs. All these are parts of speech that are involved in forming correct English sentence or clauses. Now, these are the basics that forms the parts of any sentence or word or clauses. Now, to form an English clause or sentence, the following element should be present. Apart from these parts of speech that are parts of the sentence itself or clauses of a sentence, this element should be present in any sentence or clauses. One of those elements is the subject. Every sentence must have the word, the subject or subjects. And that subject forms the main basis of that word, of that sentence. Two, all sentence must also have the word, the predicate. The predicates also forms a sentence, and we'll call that P. And sentences also goes with what? The third thing that must not be missing in a sentence is the complement. complement. And that is C. And finally, in a sentence, we have the what? The adjunct. Now, when we have the adjunct, which is what? The A. Now, in the adjuncts, we have the S, P, C, and A. So every sentence will be made up of the S, P, C, and what? A, which are the subject, the predicate, the complement, and the what? And the adjoint. Now, these are the main basic elements of every sentence. Now, how do we bring this together to form a sentence? And what's the essence of coming to know the basic elements of a sentence or a clause? Now, assume that they gave you a question that Thomas is the head of the board. You must definitely come to know that there is a subject in this sentence and there is a verb in this sentence, and there must be a complement and an adjoint in that sentence. So what if they decide to do this, clear this, and put this as a missing gap? Thomas dash the head of the board. Now, how do you know that from the option that what should be here must be? That is the essence of knowing each sentence. Now, if you know that what will be here should be a verb, then you should be able to choose the option that has to do with verbs in the options that are given to you. Now, you see the importance of knowing the basic elements of an English clause or sentence. Now, we're going to look at the subject as a whole. Now, how do we look at the subject and what do we need to know about the subject in any sentence? Now, let's consider the subject of a sentence. The subject is presented by S. Now, how do we consider the subject? What is the subject? The subject is the person, or most probably the animal, that performs an action. In some part of the sentence, you might not see it as a person, it might be an animal that performs an action, is a subject. So it may be the person, it may be a thing, it may be a place, which we are truly talking about. So no matter what it seems to be in any sentence or clause, there must be a subject. And that is what appears at the beginning of the sentence. Most of the time, you might not see the subject at the beginning of the sentence. It all depends on how the sentence structure is. Now, take a good example of this sentence. Mercy killed the goat. Now, can you isolate the subject in that sentence? Definitely, in that sentence, we have the subject, we have the action, which is the verb, and then we have other elements of that sentence. Now, can you be able to isolate the subject? The subject is a person or the thing or a place, and it has to do with the person that carried out what? The action. So that should be what? Mercy. And what did Mercy did? Mercy carried out this action. He killed the what? The goat. She killed the what? The goat. So Mercy is the subject. Why kill is a what? Is a verb in that sentence. So we are talking about the subject and how to isolate subjects in any sentence. Now let's look at this. the table is large. Now, some will say subject is just what starts a sentence first. But then this time around, the sentence begins with they. So the table is large. Now, what is the subject in that sentence? Though it is not a person that is forming the action, it is the thing we are talking about. So you see, the subject this time around is not the person, but what? But a thing. So what is the subject? The subject is what? The table. The table is the subject. And the table has has an action, and the action shows that the table is what? Is large. So what we are trying to see here is the table, which is the what? Which is the subject of the sentence. Now, the subject is the major part of speech that comes under any sentence, or that comes in any sentence. Now, the subject can be noun, the major part of any part of speech is the subject, and the subject can be noun. Take, for example, it can be the name of person, James. It can be he, it can be she, or which are all what? Which are all pronouns. So it can be he, James, he, she, or we can still say what? Shola. All these are what? They are nouns. Now, the other part that can also form a sentence is also what? Pronouns. Pronouns can form a sentence. Now remember, pronouns are words that are used instead of a word of a noun. So instead of saying James, I can say the boy or the man, right? Man or the boy is just pronoun used in replacing what? James. So instead of me saying the boy, I can say he. Man, I can still say he. So you see, the he and the he is also what? A pronoun. So pronouns are used instead of what? Instead of the verb of the nouns. Now, if I have girls, I can use what? They as the pronoun. If I have my friend and I can say we. My friend and I. We can stand this as we. That's the pronoun we can use for that. We are in charge. My friend and I are in charge. So these are pronouns that we can use in place of the noun. So instead of putting nouns, which is the name of any person, we can also use what? Pronouns. He, the boy. She is, the water, it. All these things, instead of using water, we use what? Water, chair. We use what? It. So it can also be what? Can also be the subject of a sentence. So take note of that. The subject is a person who performs an action in any word sentence. And once we are able to know that, whenever we are given any question like this, and take for example, this is missing in this sentence and is a missing gap, we can be able to know that what should be here should be the subject. So it can either be a noun or a word, a pronoun. And when we go to the options, if we see a noun there, we'll choose it. so long as it corresponds or it rhymes with the sentence once read out. So you see, that's exactly the essence of getting to know your sentence or basic elements of a sentence. So that is that for the subject. The next basic element we talk about is the predicate. Now, what do we mean by the predicate? Now, let's look at the predicate. What do we mean by the predicate? When we talk about the predicate simply put refers to what? The verb. That is the actions that are done in the what? Sentence. Now, imagine a sentence that can exist without the verb. That sentence would be very meaningless and useless. So, but a verb alone can form a sentence, but a sentence without a verb is meaningless. If the only word that makes a sentence is verb, that sentence can stand. It can be sensible, it can be a sensible sentence, but once a sentence doesn't have a verb, then that sentence will be meaningless. That clause is meaningless. So verb is very important in the formation of any sentence. Now, we can choose the following categories of verb. We have various types of verb. We can talk about sentence. Uh, Predicate has to do with what? Verb or verbs. So there are various types of verbs. We can talk about the lexical verbs. I want you to make more research on these lexical verbs. We can form a sentence with lexical verbs alone. And these lexical verbs alone, a good example of these lexical verbs alone can be goes. When we say goes, dances, we can also have something like speak, etc. All these are examples of what? Lexical verbs. They can truly form the verb in any sentence. Another type of verbs we can easily talk about is the modal verb. Now, what do we mean by modal verbs? We can add the modal and the lexical verb in forming the predicate of a sentence. Now, we already know what lexical verbs is. Verbs like goes, speak, dances, they are what? They are lexical verbs. Now, when we add a modal verb with a lexical verb, we'll have something like will go, I will go. We also have something like they can dance. We can also have something like we shall speak. So you see, while this stands as the lexical, this stands as verb. And that is how it goes. Now, the next thing we'll talk about when we are talking about the predicates, which simply means the verbs, we can use the anomalous verbs plus the lexical verbs. In the C part, we can use the what? Use the anomalous verbs plus the what? The lexical verbs. So if we combine these verbs, we can combine these verbs to form verbs. We can combine these verbs to form verb in any sentence. And what are they? Has, you can say has eaten, right? We can also say have gone, right? We can also say had spoken. We heard or someone had spoken. So when we combine anomalous verbs and lexical verbs, we have verbs like this. So in sentences where you see has eaten, that is a verb. When you see have gone, that is a verb. And when you see had spoken, that is also a verb. Now, when we talk about verbs also, we can also combine two kinds of verb to form the predicates. And such verbs can be what? We can combine auxiliary verbs plus the lexical what? The lexical verbs. So what are typical examples of the combination of auxiliary verbs and lexical verbs? Let's consider that. So when we talk about verbs, we can consider adding the auxiliary verbs and the lexical verbs to form the predicates in any sentence or the verbs in any sentence. Now, when we do that, we have this as is, going. Where is the auxiliary and the lexical is going. They are in. We can also have a verbs like we were, they were what? We are reading. And that is when we have the auxiliary verbs plus the lexical words, lexical verbs. Now we can also have primary auxiliaries alone as a verb. And when we talk about primary auxiliaries alone, we look at verbs as is, here, she was here, here, is, they are all what? They are all primary auxiliaries alone. So when you see was in any sentence, you should know that that is a what? That is a verb. She was here yesterday. Was is a verb. Is a verb. All these are primary auxiliary what? Verbs. So verbs can also occur as anomalous verbs alone. That's when you have anomalous alone, which is this. That's when you have has, when you have, and when you also have had. All these are what? Are verbs. So take good note of that. So when you see have in any sentence, it is a verb. When you see has in any sentence, it is what? An anomalous what? Verb alone. So whatever, however it goes in any of your sentence, you should bear this in mind. Do you get it now? So that is exactly what you do. So up to this point, we can see that subject and predicate forms a word, forms a sentence. So we can simply put this sentence as she was here yesterday. So what does this sentence tell us? We have she standing as the subject and was standing as the word, the predicate, which is what? The verbs in any word, in any sentence. Now, that taken, we are now going to consider the third element in our grammar, and that has to do with the what? With the complement. Now, when we talk about complement, what do we really mean? Let's look at the complement. Let's look at Now, what is a complement? Whenever, whoever, or whatever receives the action from the subject is the complement. Whoever or whatever received the action under the verb is the what? Is the complement. Now, remember we used an example earlier on that Messi killed the what? The goat. So in that sentence, Messi is the subject, killed is the predicate, which is the verb, and who receives the action is the what? The goat. So the goat is the complement. So whoever or whatever receives the action, you can say he. We can also use any other sentence. So whoever